What seemed like just an ordinary day at an upscale restaurant turned upside down when a mysterious stranger walked in, none other than Harold Thompson, undercover as an anonymous diner. Instead of a warm welcome, he faced contemptuous stares, mocking words, and outright humiliation, all from the very staff he was quietly placing his trust in. They had no idea that the black man they were looking down on was their new boss, and they could never have imagined that, in an instant, their fates were about to be flipped, without mercy. What Snoop did next wasn't just a counter-strike. It was a stunning unmasking that left everyone speechless. A lesson laid out plain and clear, no warning needed. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Harold wore an old shirt, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his gray hair. Not a single staff member, from the hostess to the servers, knew he had secretly bought the Blue Haven. He wanted to keep his identity hidden, stepping in as an ordinary customer to see how the staff treated someone without fame or flair. To Harold, this restaurant was a dream, a place where everyone would be treated fairly, no matter who they were. He walked up to the hostess stand, his worn leather shoes clicking softly on the polished wood floor. The girl behind the counter, Clara, looked up from the reservation book, her eyes quickly scanning from his cap to his shoes. The smile on her face vanished, replaced by a cold stare. "Do you have a reservation tonight?" she asked, her tone flat and devoid of warmth. Harold gave a slight smile, his voice low. "No, I didn't book ahead. Any tables open?" Clara blinked, glancing down at the book, even though Harold could see it was nearly empty. "Let me check," she said, her fingers flipping through a few pages slowly, as if stalling for time. Harold stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting. He wasn't in a rush. He wanted to see what she'd do next. After flipping back and forth for a bit, Clara looked up, lips pressed tight. "There's one table, follow me." Harold nodded and trailed her through the dining area. The restaurant wasn't busy, just a few groups chatting, the light illuminating white-clothed tables. But Clara didn't lead him to the big tables in the center, where guests were laughing. She took him to a small table by the glass door, where cold drafts slipped in every time it opened. Harold glanced at the other empty tables, roomier ones near the fireplace, but said nothing. He sat down, pulled his chair closer to the table, and took the menu from Clara's hand. She set it down without another word, and turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Harold opened the menu, but his eyes weren't on the words. He was watching. The restaurant buzzed with life, clinking wine glasses, staff chatting cheerfully with guests. A couple nearby got attentive service. A group in suits had water poured right away. But for him, no one cared. He set the menu down, tapping his fingers on the table, waiting. He wondered if this was the first sign of what he'd feared when he bought the place. A waitress approached, her name tag reading Rachel, young, with her hair tied up high. Her eyes slid over Harold like he was invisible. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone curt, holding a small notepad, but not looking at him. Harold smiled, keeping his voice friendly. "I'll take the special, and a glass of water." Rachel scribbled something, eyes glued to her pad. "Sure," she said, then turned away immediately. No extra words. Harold watched her vanish into the service area, a familiar feeling rising up, the sense of being dismissed, overlooked because of his skin and age. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. This was just the start. He looked around, spotting another staff member, maybe Brian, laughing with a nearby table of guests. Brian glanced his way, but quickly turned back, like he didn't want to be caught. At the kitchen counter, a chef, Marcus perhaps, worked over sizzling pans, but Harold still caught his fleeting look and the faint smirk that followed. Harold noted it all, every glance, every gesture. While waiting for his order, Harold thought briefly about why he'd bought the Blue Haven. He wanted it to stand for respect, a place where anyone could feel welcome. But what he was seeing, Clara's cold eyes, Rachel's attitude, made him question if that dream was being torn apart. He tapped his fingers on the table, eyes never leaving the room. Rachel returned, slamming the water glass down with a loud clack, then disappearing before Harold could say a thing. He picked it up, took a sip, still watching. Staff moved past, busy with other tables, but no one stopped to check on him. He set the glass down, disappointment mixing with resolve. He knew he'd come back. Not like this, not as a guest ignored. Next time, he'd make sure they knew who he was. Rachel came back from the service area, carrying a plate, the special Harold had ordered. She set it down in front of him, with the same curt attitude as before. No explanation, no questions. The steak looked sloppy, one side charred, the mashed potatoes cold, nothing like what Harold expected from a once reputable place like the Blue Haven. He picked up his fork, touched the meat lightly, then looked up at Rachel. "Miss, is this really the special?" he asked, his voice low but polite. Rachel glanced at him, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Yeah, it is. Anything else you need?" she replied, hand on her hip, as if his presence bothered her. Harold smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No thanks." Rachel turned away instantly, not looking back, her figure blending into the crowd of staff chatting with other tables. Harold took a bite, but the bland taste made him set his fork down. He wasn't here for the food, he was here to watch, and what he saw was getting clearer. A young couple a few tables away got Rachel's full attention. She beamed at them, checking in with care. "Is this to your liking? Need anything else?" she asked them, her voice sweet as honey. A group in suits by the fireplace had Brian, another staff member, pouring wine the moment they sat, tossing out friendly greetings. But for Harold, no one bothered. He was left alone, a shadow in this fancy space. He overheard Rachel whispering to Brian near the kitchen counter. "This old guy probably doesn't even know how much this place costs," she said, her voice low but loud enough for Harold to catch. Brian chuckled, glanced his way, then turned back quick. At the kitchen, Marcus, the chef, looked up from his pans, met Harold's eyes, and smirked faintly. Harold didn't react. He sat there, tapping the table, memorizing every word, every move. The glass door opened again, a cold gust sweeping in, making Harold pull his shirt closer. He looked around, saw Clara, the hostess, leading a new group in well-dressed, white, middle-aged folks. She took them straight to a big table by the fireplace, her smile bright as the lights. Harold glanced at the reservation book Clara had left on the counter earlier, still empty, just as he'd noticed before. So why was he shoved to this corner? He knew the answer, but he wanted to be sure. Another staff member passed by, carrying a tray of drinks for a nearby table. Harold raised a hand, meaning to ask for more water, but the guy breezed past like he didn't exist. Harold lowered his hand, that familiar feeling sinking in, being dismissed, ignored, just for his skin and age. He took a deep breath, telling himself to stay cool. This wasn't his first time facing this, but this time was different. This time, he had the power to change it. Harold looked back at the plate in front of him. He pushed it aside, not bothering to eat more. He didn't need this meal to know the Blue Haven was failing at what mattered most: respect. He thought briefly about why he'd bought this place, to make it a spot where everyone felt welcome, no matter who they were. But what he saw, Clara's icy stare, Rachel's curtness, Brian's mocking laugh, was destroying that dream right in front of him. He glanced around one last time. Rachel was still chatting with the young couple, Brian busy pouring wine for the suit group, and Marcus, at the kitchen counter, occasionally shot him a strange look. No one cared about him. No one asked if he needed anything. Harold tapped the table, disappointment and determination rising stronger than ever. He knew he couldn't let it end here. He'd come back, not as an overlooked guest, but as someone who'd make them face the cost of their disrespect. Harold stood up, pulled out his wallet, and placed money on the table, enough for the meal and a generous tip. Even though the service was so bad, it didn't deserve a dime. He didn't do it for them, but for himself, to remind himself he wasn't the one who needed to prove anything to anyone. He pulled his cap lower, stepped away from the table, his worn shoes clicking softly on the wood floor. As he pushed the glass door open and stepped out, the restaurant's noise faded behind him, the light from the Blue Haven sign spilling onto the sidewalk, but it didn't warm him. He paused outside the door, the evening's cold breeze brushing past, rustling his shirt. Harold glanced back through the clear glass, Rachel still laughing and friendly, like nothing had happened, Clara guiding a new group to their seats with care, Brian quietly moving back and forth with a tray of wine glasses. None of them noticed the man standing silently outside, nor did they know what he'd just witnessed. His voice was low and firm, just for himself to hear. "This isn't over." A few days later, Harold returned. He gently pushed the familiar glass door, this time in an old weathered coat and a gray knit cap, no longer the baseball cap from before. His plain look was like any old man in Crestwood, nothing to draw attention. He still wanted to keep his identity under wraps, at least one more time. What he'd seen before, Clara's coldness behind her smile, Rachel's impatience, and the mockery in Brian's every word, couldn't be ignored. Harold needed to be sure it wasn't just a bad moment, but their true nature. He stepped in, his old leather shoes tapping lightly on the wood floor, his sharp eyes scanning every little detail. The golden light from the chandeliers was still soft as before, the clink of cutlery mixing with the hum of customer chatter. The restaurant wasn't too packed, but the vibe was still lively. Harold approached the hostess stand where Clara stood, the reservation book open in front of her. He smiled faintly, voice low. "Any tables tonight?" Clara looked up, her eyes sweeping over him with a familiar but unfriendly glint. "Let me check," she said, her tone flat. Flipping through the empty book he'd seen last time, he stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting. After pretending to check for a bit, she looked up. "There's a table near the kitchen. Follow me." Harold nodded and followed her. This time, she led him to another small table, right by the kitchen counter, where the sizzle of pans and the sharp smell of hot oil hit hard. He glanced at the empty spacious tables in the center, but kept quiet. He sat down, pulled his chair close, and took the menu from Clara's hand. She set it down, without a word, and walked off, vanishing into the crowd. Harold didn't open the menu right away. He watched. A group of young customers came in, and Clara led them to a table by the fireplace, her smile beaming. He heard her ask, "Did you folks reserve? I've got a good spot here." Harold tapped the table, that familiar feeling creeping back. He knew he was being sidelined again, and this time, he wouldn't just sit still. Rachel emerged from the service area, approaching his table with a look of irritation. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone sharp, holding her notepad, but not meeting his eyes. Harold smiled, keeping calm. "I'll take the special, and a glass of water." "Sure," Rachel muttered, jotting something down before turning away fast, not glancing back. Harold quietly pulled his phone from his coat pocket, set it on the table, and lightly tapped the record button. He wanted proof, not just for himself, but for what he'd do next. The food came out quicker than last time, but it was just as sloppy: burnt steak, cold mashed potatoes. Rachel set the plate down with an even louder clack, like she wanted him to eat and get out. Harold eyed the food, then looked up. "Miss, this doesn't look right," he said, his voice low but clear. Rachel spun back, hand on her hip. "That's how it is. Anything else you need?" she snapped, her glare pushing him to leave. Harold shook his head, saying nothing more. Rachel walked off, blending into the crowd. Harold didn't eat. He watched. Rachel chatted with a table of white guests nearby, all smiles and care. "Is this good? Need anything else?" she asked, her voice sweet. Brian, near the kitchen, poured wine for a suited group, joking around, but for Harold, no one cared. He caught Clara whispering to a regular by the hostess stand. "People like him are always a hassle," she said, quiet but clear enough for his phone's mic to catch. He tapped the table, anger rising, but he stayed cool. Marcus, at the kitchen counter, looked up from his pans, locked eyes with Harold, smirked, and turned away, like he wasn't worth a thought. Harold scanned the room, saw another staff member, with a drink tray pass by, but when he raised a hand to call, they ignored him. He lowered it, the feeling of being dismissed sharper than ever. He thought briefly of his dream when he bought the Blue Haven, a place where everyone was treated fair, but what he saw this time was worse than before. Rachel wasn't just cold, she was harsh. Clara didn't just ignore him, she insulted him. Brian and Marcus, though not direct, fed into this air of disrespect. Harold knew this wasn't random, it was a bigger issue, and he wouldn't let it slide. Harold pushed the plate aside, not touching it. He stopped the recording, pocketed his phone, resolve burning strong. He'd seen enough, he'd heard enough. This time, he wasn't just coming back to watch. Next time, they'd face the consequences. Harold stood up, stepped away from the table, his worn shoes clicking softly on the floor. As he pushed the glass door open and stepped out, the restaurant's noise faded, the light from the Blue Haven sign glowing on the sidewalk. Harold walked into his small home on the outskirts. After leaving the restaurant for the second time, he took off his old coat, hung it on a hook, and sank into his familiar armchair. The table lamp cast light on his face, highlighting deep wrinkles and thoughtful eyes. In his hand was the phone that had just captured the insults and disrespect he'd endured. Harold knew he couldn't let it go on. He'd seen enough, heard enough, and now it was time to act. He opened his phone, replaying the night's recording. Clara's voice came through clear on the small speaker. "People like him are always a hassle." Then Rachel's, sharp and curt, "That's how it is. Anything else you need?" Harold stopped the recording, tapping the armrest. Those words weren't just aimed at him. They hit anyone dismissed for their skin or age. He'd bought the Blue Haven to make it a fair place, but what he'd witnessed was ruining that dream. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and opened the camera app on his phone. Harold set the phone on the table, adjusting it so his face filled the frame. He didn't need a script or prep, he just needed the truth. He hit record, his low voice filling the quiet room. "I'm Harold Thompson. I've been to the Blue Haven twice. Not as anyone special, just a regular customer. Both times, I was treated like I didn't exist. They put me at the worst tables, served me half-heartedly, and said things no one should hear. Here's the proof." He played the recording, letting Clara and Rachel's words echo in the video. When it ended, he looked straight at the camera. "I don't want this restaurant to keep going like this. I want people to know, and I want things to change." He stopped recording, watched it once. It was short, straight to the point, exactly what he needed. Harold wasn't tech-savvy, but he knew he needed help to spread this. He texted Maya, his niece, who was sharp with social media. "Maya, I need you to post this online, Crestwood Forum, or wherever you think works. I want people to hear it." He sent the video along, then sat back to wait. Minutes later, Maya texted back, "Uncle Harold, I've posted it on the Crestwood Forum, and shared it on Twitter and Facebook too. Added #Blue Haven exposed. People will see it soon." Harold smiled faintly, satisfaction rising. He opened his old computer on the table, went to the Crestwood Forum, and saw Maya's post already up. Views climbed from dozens to hundreds in moments. Reactions hit like a storm. First comment, "Can't believe the Blue Haven is like this." Another wrote, "I've been treated bad there too. Thanks Mr. Harold, for speaking up." #Blue Haven exposed spread, popping up on Twitter with similar stories from others. "I'm black. They always give me the table by the door," one said. "The staff there looked down on older folks," another added. Harold scrolled through, anger mixing with hope. He wasn't alone, and the truth was coming out. Soon, local media took notice. An article on the Crestwood Times site popped up. "Black elderly man speaks out after poor treatment at the Blue Haven." It quoted Harold's video, with the recording as proof. Local social media buzzed with debate. Some called for a boycott. Others demanded a public apology. Harold sat there, tapping the table, watching it spread. He hadn't expected it to blow up so fast, but he was glad. The pressure was building, and that's what he wanted. He stepped onto his small balcony, looking out at quiet Crestwood streets. A cold breeze rustled his shirt. He thought of what he'd seen at the Blue Haven: Clara's cold stares, Rachel's harshness, Brian and Marcus's mocking laughs. They didn't know who he was, didn't know what he could do, but now Crestwood knew, and Harold knew. He had to go back one more time, not as an ignored customer, but as the one who'd make them pay. Back inside, he shut off the computer and settled into his armchair. He pulled out his phone, watched the video one last time. Views topped 1,000, comments still pouring in. He whispered to himself, voice firm, not done yet. He knew the next step. He'd return to the Blue Haven. No more hiding who he was. This time, he'd face them head on, proof in hand, and all of Crestwood behind him. The next morning, the air in the restaurant at the heart of Crestwood felt heavy, like the sky before a storm. The golden chandelier light still glowed, but the usual customer chatter had faded, replaced by tense silence among the staff. Harold Thompson's video, the black old man they'd mistreated twice, was now all over social media. #Blue Haven exposed, flooding Crestwood forums and beyond. No one in the restaurant knew he owned it, but they knew trouble had come, bigger than they'd thought. Rachel stood behind the service counter, phone in hand, face pale as she played the video a third time. Harold's voice came through the tiny speaker. I was treated like I didn't exist. Then the recording hit, sharp and clear. Her voice, that's how it is. Anything else you need. And Clara's people like him are always a hassle. Rachel stopped it, her hand trembling. Just some old guy, she muttered, turning to Brian nearby. How'd this get so big? Brian, holding a wine tray, shot her a worried look. Don't you get it? All of Crestwood's talking about it. They're saying the place discriminates. He scrolled his phone, reading aloud. I got ignored there once for not wearing a suit. The Blue Haven sucks. He looked at Rachel, voice dropping. I told you not to say that stuff. Now what? Rachel shrugged, trying to play it cool. I was just joking. Who knew he'd record it? But her eyes betrayed her fear. She glanced at the glass door, where a few passers-by pointed and snapped photos. They're overreacting. It'll blow over in a few days. At the kitchen counter, Marcus stopped flipping pans, eyes glued to his phone. #Blue Haven exposed had passed 1,000 mentions, with posts calling for a boycott. You guys dragged me into this, he growled, glaring at Rachel and Brian. I just cook. I didn't say anything. Why are they saying the whole staff's rotten now? He tossed his rag on the counter, hands shaking. If this place tanks, I'm out of a job. Clara came in from the hostess area, face tight. Reporters are out there, she said, voice shaky, asking about the old man in the video. I said I don't know anything, but they won't leave. She shot Rachel a blaming look. You started this mess. I was just kidding. Why'd he make it such a big deal? Rachel snapped back. Don't pin it on me. You're in that recording too. People like him, you said that. Clara turned away, silent, but her hands gripped the reservation book like she'd crush it. Paul, the manager, stormed out of the office, face red from a call with corporate. Do you people know what's happening? He yelled, his voice bouncing around the service area. Corporate called, told me to explain the video. They want me to stonewall the press. But how, when all of Crestwood's up in arms? He jabbed a finger at Rachel. You caused this. Who's that old man that's got everything in chaos? I don't know, Rachel shot back, voice shrill. Just some regular old guy. I didn't think he mattered that much. She glanced at Brian for support, but he looked down, avoiding her eyes. Paul slammed his hand on the counter, glaring at each of them. If he comes back, no one says a word. Keep your mouths shut. Got it? We act like nothing's wrong. But his voice wavered, and they all saw he didn't believe his own words. A regular, Lisa, walked in from the main door, phone in hand. She looked around, then headed to the hostess stand. I saw the video, she said, calm but cutting. I've seen you treat older customers bad here before. Last time, An old lady got stuck by the door when the place was empty. Now I get why that old man was mad. Clara paled, saying nothing. Lisa turned, sat at a table by the door, eyes fixed on the staff like she was waiting to see what they'd do. Outside the glass door, a few local reporters gathered, cameras aimed at the Blue Haven. One shouted through the glass, "Who's the manager? We need a statement on the video." Paul rushed over, yanked the blinds shut, but the noise still seeped in. "Please, just do your jobs," he barked at the staff. "Ignore the outside." Rachel stood there, clutching her phone, eyes panicked. "He wouldn't dare come back," she said, voice trembling. "Just an old guy, right? This'll die down soon, won't it?" She looked at Brian, then Marcus, but no one answered. Brian stared down, gripping his wine tray. Marcus shook his head, turned back to his pans, but his eyes showed fear. The air in the restaurant was heavier than ever. Paul's phone rang again, probably corporate. He bolted back to the office, leaving the staff in tense silence. Rachel glanced at the glass door, seeing a small crowd forming outside. She whispered to herself, "He wouldn't dare," but her voice trailed off, and deep down, she knew something bad was coming. The next afternoon, the glass door swung open again. Harold stepped in, no longer the plain old man in a worn coat or cap. He wore a crisp black suit, polished leather shoes, and a steady gaze that carried authority. Beside him was Lawrence Carter, a middle-aged man in a gray suit, holding a briefcase. The restaurant went silent for a split second as they appeared, the golden chandelier light highlighting Harold's stern presence. Outside the glass, a few local reporters raised cameras, trying to capture the moment. Rachel, behind the service counter with a tray, froze when she saw Harold. Brian stopped wiping a table, eyes wide with panic. Marcus dropped a ladle in the kitchen, jaw slack. Clara, near the hostess stand, clutched the reservation book, face drained of color. Paul, emerging from the office, halted mid-step, still gripping his phone from a corporate call. They didn't know the old man from the video, the one they'd dismissed and mocked, was now this, but they sensed something awful was near. Harold stopped in the middle of the dining area, looking around. The hum from the few customers died out. All eyes on him. He took a deep breath, his low voice ringing clear. "I'm Harold Thompson. Twice I came here. I was treated like I didn't matter. Today I'm not here as a customer." He raised a hand, and Lawrence opened the briefcase, pulling out a stack of papers. Harold held them up for all to see. "This is the ownership contract for the Blue Haven. I'm the owner of this place." The room went dead quiet, only the faint whir of cameras outside the glass breaking through. Rachel dropped her tray onto the counter with a dry clack. Paul stepped forward, voice shaky. You're serious? I wasn't told anything." Harold glanced at him, didn't answer, then turned to Rachel. "You," Harold said, pointing straight at her. "Twice you served me. First time you dropped my plate like trash. Second time, I said the food wasn't right. You said that's how it is, and brushed me off. Anything else you said?" He pulled out his phone, hit play on the recording. Rachel's voice came through. "That's how it is. Anything else you need?" Then Clara's, "People like him are always a hassle." Harold stopped it, staring at Rachel. "Explain." Rachel stammered, hands trembling. "I didn't mean it. I was just joking." She looked to Brian for help, but he kept his head down, avoiding her gaze. Harold shook his head, voice icy. "Joking? I don't find it funny. You're done. Grab your stuff, and get out now." Rachel's eyes widened, mouth open like she'd argue, but Harold's look shut her up. She turned, walked to the staff area, shoulders shaking. Harold shifted his gaze to Paul. "And you, a manager who doesn't know what's happening under his nose. You let staff treat customers like this. Let this place turn into this. You're done too. Go." Paul flinched, voice rising. "But I've worked here 10 years. You can't." Harold cut him off, sharp. "I can, and I did. Out." Paul stood there, face flushed, then stormed back to the office, clutching his phone, like he'd crush it. Harold turned to the rest. "Brian, Marcus, Clara, I saw what you did, smirking behind my back. ignoring me, favoring others just because they looked right. He paused, eyes sweeping over them. Brian bowed his head lower, voice soft. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't speak up when I should have. I was wrong. Harold looked at him, didn't reply right away, then nodded slightly. Good, you know you're wrong. But from now on, if I see it again, you're gone too. Marcus stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, voice shaky. I didn't say anything to you. I just cooked. I don't want to lose my job. Harold eyed him, voice low. Then do your job well, but don't think staying quiet makes you clean. I see everything. Clara stood by the hostess stand, eyes teary. I didn't mean to offend. I just... Harold raised a hand, cutting her off. I heard what you said. I'm letting it slide this time, but one more, and you know what's coming. Clara nodded, not daring to look up. Harold stepped to the center of the restaurant, voice booming. I bought the Blue Haven because I wanted it to be a home for everyone, no matter their skin, age, or what they wear. You ruined that. From now on, anyone who doesn't respect customers has no place here. Am I clear? No one dared respond. Rachel's footsteps echoed from the staff area, dragging her bag, eyes red, bolting out the glass door without a glance back. Hall followed, head down, still gripping his phone. Harold watched them, then turned to Lawrence. Call corporate. Tell them to send new trainers. I want this place fixed. Lawrence nodded, pulling out his phone to dial. Harold stepped to the center again, eyes scanning Brian, Marcus, and Clara. I'll be back, he said, voice low but firm. Next time I want to see a difference. Don't let me down. He turned, pushed the glass door open, and stepped out. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras on him. But Harold didn't stop. He walked past, calm and steady, leaving the restaurant in heavy silence. Brian stood there, hands trembling. Marcus returned to the kitchen, eyes thoughtful. Clara gripped her book, tears streaking her cheeks. The next morning, Lawrence stood in the dining area, holding a fresh stack of papers from corporate. Brian, Marcus, and Clara faced him, eyes mixed with worry and resolve. From now on, things are different, Lawrence said, voice low but steady. Mr. Thompson wants this place to be a home for every customer, no matter their age, skin, or anything else. We're retraining everyone. If you can't keep up, you're out like the other two. Brian nodded, hands in pockets, voice quiet. I get it. I want to make it right. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron, nodding slightly. I just want to keep my job. I'll do better. Clara bowed her head, eyes still red from yesterday. I don't want to lose this. I'll change. Lawrence eyed them, then set the papers on the table. Good. Starting today, we relearn how to serve, how to respect. No one gets ignored anymore. Training kicked off right after. Lawrence walked them through it, step by step, greeting every customer with a smile, listening to even the smallest requests, handling complaints without blame. Brian took careful notes, set on making up for not speaking up when Harold was dismissed. Marcus, reluctant at first, started paying attention, even suggesting menu tweaks to please customers. Clara, clumsy at the start, slowly learned to meet customers' eyes when talking, dropping her old judging stares. Crestwood's community took notice. After Harold's video and the firings, curious folks came back to the Blue Haven to see the change. One evening, Lisa, the regular who'd spoken up, walked in, sat by the glass door. Brian approached fast, a slight smile on his face. Hi, what'll you have tonight? Lisa looked at him, a bit surprised, then ordered a steak. When it came out, neat and steaming, she nodded, pleased. Way better than before, she said, calm. Brian exhaled, heading back to the counter with a touch of pride. Marcus, at the kitchen counter, started testing a new dish, a steak with a local Crestwood spice sauce. When an older customer said it was better than last time I was here, Marcus grinned, feeling his work matter for the first time. Clara, at the hostess stand, greeted each guest with a warmer tone, though she still wiped sweat off her brow from nerves now and then. Slowly, customers returned in bigger numbers, laughter filling the restaurant again. But Harold didn't just leave it to Lawrence. One evening, he walked into the Blue Haven unannounced, still in his black suit, calm as ever. The place was livelier than before, but he didn't sit right away. He stood near the door, watching. Brian brought a water tray to an older couple's table, checking in gently. "Need anything else, sir?" he asked, voice soft. Marcus worked the kitchen pans, but the dishes came out neater. Clara led a group of black customers in, seating them center stage, instead of some tucked-away corner like before. Harold approached the hostess stand, and Clara jumped when she saw him. "Mr. Thompson," she stammered, clutching her book. Harold nodded, voice low. "Just checking in. How you holding up?" Clara dipped her head, voice small. "I'm trying, sir. I don't want to let you down again." Harold looked at her, then nodded slightly. "Good. Keep it up." He walked to a table by the fireplace, sat down. Brian came over quick, a faint smile on his lips. "Hi, sir. What do you have tonight?" Harold smiled, feeling a hint of satisfaction for the first time. "The special, and a glass of water." Brian nodded, hustling off. When the food arrived, steak hot, mashed potatoes fragrant. Harold took a bite, nodded. "Much better," he said, eyeing Brian. "You're doing good, but it's got to be like this every day. Got it?" Brian nodded, voice firm. "Yes, sir. I won't forget." Harold looked around, saw customers chatting happily. No more judging looks or curt attitudes from the staff. He stood, left cash and a tip on the table, and stepped outside. After weeks of tense overhaul, the restaurant reopened with an official relaunch. The golden chandeliers sparkled, the smell of grilled steak and fresh bread filled the air. Customer laughter rang out, blending with soft jazz. Harold Thompson stood by the glass door, in his familiar black suit, eyes gleaming as he watched people stream in. He was no longer the old man they'd overlooked. He was the one who'd made this place the reality of his dream. Brian stood behind the service counter, beaming as he brought water trays to tables. "Hi folks, what'll it be tonight?" he asked an older couple, voice warm. Marcus worked the kitchen pans, but his new Crestwood spiced steak special came out hot and plated sharp. Clara, at the hostess stand, welcomed each guest with a bright smile, guiding them to the best tables. No more judging eyes or unfair picks. The place was packed, young families to old folks, all treated the same. Harold stepped into the dining area's center, holding a small plaque. He raised it, his low voice cutting through the noise. "I've got a few words." The room hushed, all eyes on him. "I bought the Blue Haven because I wanted it to be a home for everyone, no matter who they are. For a while, it wasn't that. But now, thanks to the folks here and all of Crestwood, it's what I dreamed of." He hung the plaque on the wall by the fireplace, the words carved clear. "All are welcome." Applause erupted, from staff to customers, loud like a seal of approval. Lisa, the regular who'd spoken up, sat by the glass door, nodding as Brian brought her food. "This place is totally different now," she said, looking at Harold. "You pulled off something nobody saw coming." Harold smiled, nodded slightly, then stepped outside, standing under the Blue Haven sign, watching the steady flow of people. He saw an old lady led to a center table by Clara, a black family laughing with Brian, and Marcus getting praise from young guests. The place wasn't just busy, it was alive, just like he'd dreamed. After the relaunch, Harold sat in his small home with his niece Maya. He told her his journey, from being dismissed that first time, to the viral video, to the tense showdown. "I didn't do this for money, Maya," he said, voice low. "I did it to leave something, a place where everyone's got a spot." Maya took his hand, eyes shining. "I'll tell this story, Uncle Harold, so no one forgets." Harold nodded, glancing at Evelyn's photo on the table, his late wife who'd always believed in fairness. He felt her here, smiling at him. Then a letter slid through the door slot, breaking his thoughts. He picked it up, read it. Rachel's handwriting. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry for what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to change." Harold folded it, didn't reply. He didn't need apologies. He needed action, and the Blue Haven was his answer. He stood, stepped onto the balcony, looking out at quiet Crestwood. The Blue Haven was now a symbol of respect, not just there, but across the community. Social media posts still mentioned Blue Haven exposed, but now with praise worth going back to. They really turned it around. Harold breathed in the cold air, a full sense of satisfaction settling in. He'd turned a place that once dismissed him into a legacy, not just for him, but for everyone ever overlooked. Harold returned to the restaurant one last time that night. He sat by the fireplace, ordered the special from Brian. When it came, hot, fragrant, he took a bite, nodded, pleased. "Good job," he said, looking at Brian, Marcus, and Clara working. "Keep it up," they nodded, eyes full of resolve. He stood, stepped outside, the light from the Blue Haven sign glowing on the sidewalk. Harold looked back one last time, saw customers laughing, staff busy but kind. He whispered to himself, "Done." He felt Evelyn beside him, and he knew he'd done right. Harold turned, walked into Crestwood's dark, calm as ever. The Blue Haven wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was his legacy, a place where everyone was welcome, forever. The story of Harold Thompson and the Blue Haven mirrors real issues in today's U.S., especially the racism and ageism still lingering in public spaces like restaurants, where service can hinge on bias. Harold, an older black man, got brushed off by staff like Rachel and Clara, from being stuck at lousy tables by the door or kitchen, to snide remarks like people like him are always a hassle. A snapshot of how many African Americans and seniors face unfair treatment daily. Harold's viral video, and Crestwood's pushback, via Blue Haven exposed, echo the power of social media to expose injustice, much like Black Lives Matter or phone-recorded incidents across America now. The staff's panic facing fallout, and Harold firing Rachel and Paul, show that both personal and systemic accountability matter when tackling prejudice. The lesson here isn't just condemning discrimination, it's how to act for change. Harold didn't just gripe, he used his ownership to overhaul the Blue Haven, retraining staff like Brian and Marcus, making it a place where all are welcome. In real U.S. life, we can take a page from Harold. Use whatever spot you've got, big or small, to push fairness. Don't stay quiet like Brian did at first. Speak up like Lisa when you see wrong. And like Harold's check-ins and relaunch, change takes sticking with it, not just one standoff, but a long-haul commitment to ensure everyone from old ladies to black families gets respect every day. Thanks for watching Harold's journey turn the Blue Haven into a place that respects everyone. Subscribe so you don't miss the next meaningful story.